Okay, now we have our next presenter. Our next presenter is Anna Cosner, and she joins us from Illinois, where she is the Director of Retail and Events at the Morton Arboretum. Anna oversees the special events, facility rental, food service, and retail departments at the Morton Arboretum, and has also chaired the Arboretum's Diversity and Inclusion Council since its inception in 2016. The Diversity and Inclusion Council is composed of interested staff from all departments who work together to enact the Arboretum's D&I strategy and create a more welcoming and inclusive space for visitors, staff, and volunteers. Today you will hear from Anna about the process in which the Arboretum began this journey and will offer some insight on how you too can help your organization become a more welcoming and inclusive place. Now I'd like to present Anna Cosner.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anna, and thank you so much for tuning in today to talk about D&I. So like Abby mentioned, I am the Director of Retail and Events at the Morton Arboretum, and I do all those fun earned revenue things like she talked about. I have also chaired the Diversity and Inclusion Council since it was created in 2016. So that's a little bit about me, but I also want to start this presentation off by recognizing all of the other teams at the Arboretum that have really helped push this forward. So we have really, really strong support and leadership from our human resources team, and that's really been integral to pushing this forward. And they also found a great consultant that we partner with. We work with a group called the Kaleidoscope Group, which is based out of Chicago, and they're a D&I consulting firm, and they work with nonprofits, for-profits, all sorts of different kinds of organizations, which has really been grateful. We can kind of pick their brains on different ways they've seen D&I work in other organizations. So I just want to put that out there. I am by no means doing this on my own. There's a lot of support behind it. I also kind of want to lay the foundation that I absolutely do not have all the answers for building D&I in all public gardens, but I think the Arboretum has had a really great journey in working in this area, and so it's a great case study to just see how it's worked in one place, and I'm really hopeful that you all can take some lessons that we've learned and apply them to your own gardens, or manipulate them a little bit and in a way that works for you. So I just wanted to get started first off with a bit of a timeline, because I said that I am, there we go. I've been leading the council since 2016, but the process of forming this and really making a strong effort in diversity and inclusion began all the way back in 2014. So we're almost 5 years in at this point, and I feel like we're still at the beginning. So back in 2014, that was when we first started partnering with this consulting group, again, kind of led by our human resources department. And our consultant, the main person that we work with, did interviews with all of our leadership team, which for the Arboretum is all of our vice presidents plus our executive director, to kind of get their take on where we stand with diversity and inclusion at the Arboretum and also where we want to go. Then in 2015, we started with some more stakeholder focus groups, and those are groups of staff representing different areas of diversity. So we brought in, they pulled together all of the people of color who work at the Arboretum to talk about that. They brought in a group who've worked with diverse audiences in the past to talk through some of our experiences from the visitor side. And I will say those were done without any HR representative in the room, which probably definitely led to some candid conversations. The consultants then took all the information from those focus groups and took out all the identifying information from the staff and created some good summaries that could then be shared with both the board and our leadership team. So our consultants then did interviews with our board of trustees to make sure they were bought in, and that the board of trustees and the leadership team together crafted the vision of success, which we're going to get to in the next slide, I think. And that's really the guiding North Star of where do we want to be as an institution when it comes to diversity? What is our guiding mission in this area? After we had that vision all pulled together, there was a formal employee launch. All of this other stuff had kind of been happening behind the scenes, and unless you personally had been pulled into one of these focus groups, you weren't totally aware of everything that was going on or what the Arboretum was doing with D&I. So at one of our all-staff meetings in 2015, our president, Dr. Donnelly, launched this with the entire staff and shared the vision of success and gave a little bit of an outline of what we could expect, why we were working on it, and to personally put his stamp of approval on it and say, this is something that I want and this is something that I believe in. And I feel as that was really impactful with the staff, having the leader get up there and say, this is the future for the Arboretum. So we did that. And then our leadership team also got together and crafted a more robust strategy for our D&I process. And we're going to go over some of that in the following slides. It gets really detailed and very specific to us, so it probably wouldn't be applicable to everybody here. But a lot of that is about setting goals, picking our key priorities, and setting out a bit of a timeline for the first 2 to 3 years. And that was done, like I said, by our leadership team before the council was even formed. We had a framework, we had a direction that had buy-in from the very top of the organization. So in 2016, the following year, our Board of Trustees formally adopted a statement on board diversity. They're trying to recruit more diverse board members, which is wonderful. We also did some training for managers and supervisors on cultural competencies, how to manage diverse staff, and also how to overcome your implicit biases in hiring and promoting your staff, which it was kind of controversial for some of our managers to go through that, people who hadn't really thought about that before. So it's definitely a work in progress, but being able to say phrases like implicit bias and take that issue on head on was really great. I think it also showed people that we were serious about tackling these issues. 2016 was also when the co-chairs were selected. It was myself and a colleague who's no longer at the Arboretum. So I currently am the only chair of the D&I Council, but initially there were 2 of us. We recruited the first class of council members. We launched and we formed subgroups, which represent the 3 big priorities that we have identified for the Arboretum that we want to work on. So that's a little bit of the timeline leading up to the council forming. So as you can see, there was a lot of groundwork that was laid before the council actually launched that I think really helped set us up for success. And a lot of that has to do with getting that institutional buy-in, getting people on the same page so that we didn't have to do that work as a council. That was already done by our leadership. So next, I wanted to talk a bit about those definitions that we mentioned, or that I mentioned before. So these are the things that had been developed by our leadership team that the council was set up with when we launched. Our vision of success is the Morton Arboretum is a champion of diversity, supporting a culture of inclusion that attracts, inspires, and engages people to achieve success. So that's really our ultimate goal. If we're successful in our diversity and inclusion strategy, that is what we will become. We are definitely not there yet. There's a long road to go before that, but it's our guiding light. And then we also have our own definitions of diversity and inclusion. I don't think they're groundbreaking in any way, but I think it was kind of empowering for people to sit down and think about, what do we mean at the Morton Arboretum when we say the word diversity or when we say the word inclusion? And from a lot of reading I've done about other organizations that have gone through a D&I process, there has been a lot of hand-wringing over what words mean. So I think it's a useful exercise to go through. So for us, diversity is the broad mix of people with different abilities, skills, experiences, and cultural backgrounds. And for the Arboretum, the definition of inclusion is encouraging, embracing, and valuing diversity to carry out our mission. We have run into some challenges with those definitions, and I can get to that in a little bit, but those were the definitions that we came up with, and I think that helped. It helped in a lot of ways. It also challenged us in a few ways when we were getting started. So I can get into that when I talk about challenges later on. But like I said, these were all developed through those focus group meetings, the interviews with leadership, interviews with the board, and presented to the council when we first got going. So it was a lot of legwork we didn't have to do, but at the same time, maybe not all the council members were bought in on these exact definitions from the start. So just a little bit on how we created the council itself, some of the nuts and bolts. Myself and a colleague were asked by our HR team to be co-chairs, like I mentioned before. We both said yes. It was work that we had been engaged with either outside of our jobs or tried to wedge it into our actual work. So we were both really excited to take it on. There was a call for nominations, and people could either nominate themselves to join the committee, or they could be nominated by their vice president to join the committee. So we got a little bit of both. We tried to be very upfront with the time commitment that we would be expecting of people. We have a lot of different staff committees at the Arboretum, and most of them have maybe once a month or once every other month a meeting for an hour, and we knew that this was going to be more intensive. So we wanted to make sure that people understood what they were undertaking when they signed up for this. We do quarterly meetings of the entire council, which are typically about a half a day, and that's 4 times a year. And then each of our subcommittees meets monthly, which is usually about an hour or two every month. Plus there's additional work that's going on in between all those meetings. So it's a pretty significant chunk of time that we're asking people to give to this initiative. Some of our selection criteria when we're trying to select who should be on the council, it wasn't just if you're interested, you're automatically on. We had a giant matrix of all the different elements of diversity because we wanted to make sure we had a representative group of staff working on this. It included kind of the standard diversity aspects such as race, gender, if they're a member of the LGBTQ community. But then we also included things like department, tenure at the Arboretum, full-time versus part-time, level of previous experience, or if they have a personal experience with D&I work. So we wanted to make sure it was balanced and that we didn't have, 15 people from the development team and 3 people from horticulture. We wanted to make sure it was more representative of what the staff at the Arboretum actually looks like. And we also wanted to include full and part-time staff, since we do have a very significant part-time labor force. We did not include the seasonal staff just because there's so much turnover and we knew this would be a multi-year commitment. We didn't think that would really be effective for the first go-round, but we definitely did include a good number of part-time staff. In the end, we ended up with about 20, it was between 20 and 25 when we first accepted folks onto the council. We only had to turn away a couple of people, and it was because their department was overrepresented, not because they wouldn't be great members of the council, which was really encouraging. And then in our first meeting, we had a whole day for introductions, orientation, onboarding. We went over all of these goals that had been set by our leadership team, and everyone on the council was assigned to a subcommittee. Most of them were people were able to pick their own preference for where they wanted to work or where they had more interest. Some of them we had to shift people around a little bit to make it somewhat even. And then from there on out, we've really been working within those subcommittees. They've been doing the bulk of the heavy lifting on this. So I wanted to definitely take some time to go over what those subcommittees are, how they've been functioning, why we chose them. So the first one of the 3 is workplace. The 3, I should put this out there, the 3 subcommittees that we chose to focus on are workplace, workforce, and community. And those were selected by the staff focus groups before the council was formed out of a list of, I think, 5 or 6 that our consultant had presented to us. And these were the 3 that really stood out as things that should be top priorities for the Arboretum. So workforce is creating a work environment where all employees know they are valued and engaged. The goals for that, which were crafted for the Arboretum, promote communication between all levels and across the organization, create a culture of opportunities for insights and innovation from staff and volunteers, value, support, and equip all employees to do their best work. So those are specific to the Arboretum, and they're specific to issues that we felt our organization was facing. And you'll notice there's no specific mention of race or LGBTQ issues or anything in those goals, because the whole point of the workplace group is to approach our work environment holistically. We want to make the Arboretum a great place for people to work. We want people to stay here. We want people to feel like they are engaged in the mission of the Arboretum. And we knew that some of our bigger issues had to do with communication. We knew that some of our bigger issues had to do with staff development. So those are actually more of the things that that workplace group has been focusing on. And partially because those are the biggest issues we're facing, and partially, to be perfectly honest, those are kind of low-hanging fruit, especially the communication thing. That's something that's relatively easy for us to make progress on, or at least work towards, especially in the first year or two. So we wanted to focus on things that would have some easy accomplishments up front before we started tackling the really hard stuff. So one of the things that this group has been working on for the last couple of years is a blog that is on our intranet. The Arboretum has a staff-only intranet site, so they're posting resources for staff, interesting articles that people can read that relate to D&I and gardens or nature. We also try to celebrate the accomplishments of different departments. If our education team has just integrated Spanish language vocabulary cards into some of their education programs, we want to make sure we call that out and celebrate them for making a more inclusive program. It's a lot of little things like that right now, but it definitely does help the staff feel a little more engaged and feel like they're contributing to a bigger picture thing. And the photo that's here is just of our staff at a quarterly coffee meetup, which is something that our HR team has championed. Each quarter, a different department hosts all of the staff or any of the staff that want to attend for coffee, conversation, free food, and a little bit of sharing out about what that department does. So when the D&I Council hosted the coffee meetup, we had a talkback wall where people could write anonymous post-its on what they wanted the Arboretum to do with diversity and inclusion, and got some good feedback from that. We also used it as an opportunity, again, to show off a little bit and show, hey, did you know we've been putting out Spanish language ads? We've been revising our website to make it more accessible to people who are blind, and all these things that I think were already happening behind the scenes at some level, and really call them out and celebrate them for promoting diversity at the Arboretum. So the next subcommittee or focus group that we had is workforce, which is very similar to workplace, and we get the phrasing confused in our heads a lot, but workforce is all about the people at your organization. So what is your EEO data? How does that compare to your local community? The formal definition that we work with, seeking to attract and retain the best talent that reflects diversity throughout the organization. And then our goals are really just to have a more diverse staff. The workplace group is focused more on that inclusion element of making sure everyone feels welcome and comfortable and safe. The workforce is just getting a more diverse staff in the door and established to begin with. So we're focusing both on external recruitment and pipeline issues so that we can train up the next generation of staff for the Arboretum, both in our science and horticulture teams, but also more broadly. And I think a big effort that that team has been making is to educate people on just the breadth of different work that happens at the Arboretum, so that people in our local community would realize they don't have to be a plant person to work here. They could still contribute to our mission without having a green thumb. So that's kind of where that is at. Excuse me. I think this is one of the more challenging focuses for the Arboretum, just because it happens so slowly. You can only hire for new staff when you have a vacancy. And I mean, we've been creating some positions, but not at huge amounts. So some of it is just dependent on the rate of turnover here, and then making sure we're getting really great qualified candidates. The training, like I mentioned earlier, for managers to overcome their implicit biases in hiring was definitely a great step. I think we probably have more to do in that area because it's just a really hard thing. It's very challenging to people, but we're working on it. We're trying out some new new places for recruiting, rewriting job descriptions to make sure they're inclusive and not having requirements in there that you don't really need, and really challenging managers. Do you really need a bachelor's degree to do that job, or would an associate's be fine? Things like that that can sometimes weed out more diverse candidates. So definitely something we're working on. It's challenging, but little by little we're getting there. We compare our EEO data, as far as race and ethnicity goes at least, we compare that to the census data for DuPage County, which is where we're located. We're about 45 minutes west of Chicago. So it's largely suburban, some rural, and it's a largely white county. But even in DuPage, we are whiter than the white county that we are in. So that's not great. And that is something that we are trying to address so that we're at least more reflective of our community, and so that our community then in turn will feel more welcome at the Arboretum. And speaking of community, that is the third focus group that we've really been working on over the last few years. And this one is, I don't want to say easy, but it's at least easier to wrap your head around. Seeking to understand, attract, and serve diverse populations, connecting them to the Arboretum and its mission, increasing awareness, increasing diversity of people who actually come and visit, and then building longer-term relationships with different organizations, community groups, so that we can make this a sustainable trend going forward. We have a lot of members who visit the Arboretum. Just a little bit of background in case you've not been here before. Of our 1.2 million annual visitors, about 60% are members of the Arboretum, and about 40% are non-members. So we're actually a majority member when it comes to just daytime visitation. Our membership base is not incredibly diverse, and we know that, and it's something that we've been working on in collaboration with our membership team, because it's something they want to improve as well. One of the things that's been really challenging in improving our community outreach is data. We do not have great data about who's visiting, why, where are they coming from, what's their background. With 60% of our visitors being members, we have pretty good member data. We know who our members are. We do really thorough studies, I think every 3 years, to make sure we understand who they are and why they're coming, what motivates them. We don't have any kind of regular data collection or evaluation on non-member visitors. The best we can get is we do a pretty exhaustive evaluation of our annual holiday lights event, Illumination. That constitutes about 10% of our annual attendance. So because it is such a huge sample size, we can extrapolate some of that to speak for our regular visitorship, but we don't want to take it too far because that is a very different experience and is going to attract a very different crowd than our daytime visitors. So we're working off of that data. We've been trying to find new ways of collecting data. We don't have a formal evaluation team here at the Arboretum, so this is something that's really been a challenge for us and for the community subgroup as a whole, is how do we know we're making progress? Just because we're making these initiatives, we can't prove that more people are coming. And I mean, we've got a lot of scientists here, and we like to see hard numbers, and we like to see proof of concept. So something we're still working on, but we have made smaller strides. Some of the things that this team has really pushed, we've done multilingual nights, Spanish language nights at some of our family programs, and hired performers who can present their performance in Spanish. We have done a lot with accessibility, which is really exciting. So we're trying to be more welcoming to people with disabilities and make sure they can still experience the Arboretum, since that is such a huge percentage of the population. That's been a really successful entry point for us in a lot of ways. So those are the 3 top focuses for the council for the last few years. Next up, I wanted to go over some of the things we've accomplished, and then I could speak a little bit to the challenges that we've faced, some of my maybe tips and tricks of the trade if you were thinking of starting something at your organization, and then I'd be more than happy to take questions. So first up, though, I want to brag a little bit. Some of our accomplishments, like I mentioned before, accessibility improvements to mortonarb.org. We've been integrating D&I into some of our public events. You can see down in the lower right-hand corner, that's a promotional image for our annual Destination Asia Festival, which has pre-existed or predated the council, but it's really grown a lot, and the council has provided some great insight into that event, as well as a lot of our others. It helps that one of our event coordinators is on the council and is very passionate about this, so she makes sure to work it in. We've been doing disability awareness training, and we actually did an intro to ASL staff training, which was well attended. Again, great HR team who expanded or advocated for and successfully expanded our health benefits to include domestic partners. So when folks are interviewing for jobs here, they know we're serious about this work of inclusion. We're kind of putting our money where our mouth is. We started doing Spanish language advertising. As you can see in the lower left, that's a bilingual ad for our Arbor Day programs. And then, like I mentioned before, we hosted a staff coffee meetup so that folks could get to know the council members a little bit, see a little bit of what we've been doing. And that was year one. We were trying to really tackle a lot of quote unquote low-hanging fruit, things that we could do, execute relatively quickly and get off the ground to help motivate us to push forward as a council and take on bigger projects. So first year was definitely smaller, but things that could be turned around pretty quickly. 2018, we just wrapped up. We expanded sensory-friendly programming for people with sensory processing disabilities and those on the autism spectrum. We did a Spanish language map and guide, which if you're going to start advertising in another language, you should be able to welcome those people once they're here on site. So that was really crucial. That took a lot longer than we wanted it to, but it is here, it is out. It's one of my big projects for 18. I'm happy it's out. We actually did scheduled American Sign Language interpretation at some of our special events. We do some theatrical presentations, and so we actually hired ASL interpreters to have them there instead of doing it on request. We could just schedule it, and then people could come if they were available, which was great. We made some improvements to our accessible parking spaces. We had over 4,000 museums for all visitors. This is something I would definitely recommend to any gardens out there who are looking for an easy way to get started with community outreach for diversity. Museums for All is a program run by IMLS and the Association of Children's Museums, and it's a way to reach out to the low-income communities in your neighborhoods. Basically, you agree to give folks who have an electronic benefits transfer card, an EBT card, free or extremely reduced admission to your garden, and then they can be promoted via the Museums for All program. It's been something that's been really great for us, and it really saw a lot of growth in 2018. Our general attendance overall grew a lot in 18, but this particular program was also very successful. So that's something I would definitely recommend checking out. And then finally in 2018, we had our first rotation of council members, which is one of these hard things, but it ultimately makes the council more sustainable. So when everyone signed up for the council and agreed to be on it in 2016, they all signed up for a 2-year term. And then all of those terms were going to come to an end at the same point, at mid-2018. And we'd had a little bit of attrition. We'd had a handful of people who'd moved on to other jobs. So they were no longer at the Arboretum. So we sent out a survey to all existing council members asking them if they wanted to leave at the end of their term, stay on for 1 more year, or stay on for 2 more years. And we have a very cooperative group because they split themselves evenly into thirds between those 3 options. So with that, we then recruited for a new class of council members, a lot of folks who have been new to the Arboretum in the last couple of years, and then some folks who wanted to participate in the first round, but for whatever reason couldn't make it work. They were able to step up and join in this new rotation. So we did some onboarding for the new folks at the end of last year to get them more integrated into the group, to get them assigned to the subcommittees. We rebalanced all of our subcommittees because with that staff attrition, that poor community group who'd been trying to do a lot of work, I think everybody who had moved on to another job happened to be in that one group. So they ended up with only 2 or 3 people by the end of 2018. So we definitely put a lot of new people on that team to try and give them more resources and energy to push forward with their goals. And then we also added some key players to each of the other subcommittees as well. Those are kind of accomplishments. We do have, the other big accomplishment for 2018, which I didn't put on here, was we actually expanded professional development opportunities for part-time staff. This is something else that was championed by our HR department, but the D&I Council absolutely got behind and advocated for. So now all part-time year-round staff at the Arboretum have an additional 10 hours of professional development time that's been budgeted for them to attend trainings, to attend meetings, things that might be a little bit outside of their normal scope of work. And part of the goal of that was to make them feel more included at the Arboretum, because we definitely got feedback from staff surveys that there was a bit of division between the full-time and part-time teams. So we're trying to get those part-time folks feeling a little more engaged and a little more in the loop on everything that's going on here. So, challenges. And this is my last slide, and then I would be happy to take some questions. It has definitely not been an easy road, and we are definitely not at our destination yet. But with that said, I think we've made a lot of progress. As I mentioned, I think when I was showing the slide with our definitions of diversity, inclusion, and the vision of success, it was a little bit of a challenge with some of our council members when they walked into their first diversity and inclusion council meeting and realized that all this other work had already been happening and they hadn't been a part of it, and that they didn't get to choose the new definitions. They didn't get to set those high-level goals that had already been done. So I think some people really appreciated it, but some people wanted more control over the process. So that was definitely a challenge we had to work through, and our consultant from Kaleidoscope Group was really, really helpful in helping me and our other co-chair work with those council members to get them feeling comfortable with the direction that had been set for the council. One of the key things that she kept saying was, you don't have to be 100% happy with this definition of diversity. Can you get to 80%? If you can get to 80%, then we can get there and we're good and we can move on and actually move on to the work of this. But don't try to get to 100%, because then we're never going to move past the definitions. And that was very, very true. Again, from reading I've done of other organizations who try to do the definition work, it's just something that can really bog you down. And at the end of the day, I don't think we've gone back to those definitions in at least a year as something that needs to be discussed in depth. So working through that was a big challenge in the beginning. I think one of the things that we really have going for us that I know a lot of other organizations have struggled with is this idea of institutional buy-in and feeling like they may not have support from leadership. I feel like the Arboretum's experience has been very different, because the impetus for creating the Diversity and Inclusion Council really did bubble up from our leadership team and from our HR department and from our board. It was something that those with power at the Arboretum were asking about and wondering, why are we such a white organization? Why do we have, why don't we have more LGBTQ employees? Why aren't our visitors representing the diversity of our community? So because we started from that place, we didn't really have to deal with that buy-in from leadership or from the organization, which was very, very helpful. And I feel like we started off ahead of a lot of organizations who have to do that kind of work first. Our staff has really bought in. We know from staff surveys that the just rank and file staff are very supportive of the D&I Council. They really like that we have it. It's something that makes them proud to work at the Arboretum. We don't get a lot of feedback from our staff, and that's something that has really been a challenge for the council. I mean, the council is only 20, 25 people. We have, I want to say, 300 to 400 staff members. So we're not going to be successful if we can't get those outside of the council doing this work too, because it's not just the job of the D&I Council to encourage this work at the Arboretum. It's their job to be cheerleaders and to advocate for change, but they need colleagues to really step up and take on some of these projects themselves. So we don't get a whole lot of feedback from staff about things they think we could be doing better. We don't get a whole lot of new ideas coming from non-council members, and that's something that we're really working on, trying to work with our vice president, team of vice presidents to encourage their staff to give more feedback, but it's definitely a challenge. The last thing that I think has been not hard, but it's just a reality, and I alluded to this earlier, is just the speed of change. We've been doing this work really for almost 5 years now, and in some ways I can see the change, especially in our visitor base. We're definitely getting more diverse visitors just anecdotally. However, if you look at our staff demographics, they are very, very similar to where they were years ago. And part of that is just the nature of having low turnover and having to, you can only hire at the speed you have vacancies. So that's something that has been discouraging at moments, especially for members of the council who are so passionate about this work and really want to make a change, and for them to just see our numbers stay virtually unchanged year over year has been kind of hard for them. So part of my job as the chair of the council is to be a bit of a cheerleader and celebrate people's accomplishments and show them, no, we are making a change. We are doing this work. It is having an impact, but it's a long-term thing. This isn't a 2-year project and then, oh, we're diverse and we're inclusive and we're done. No, this is forever going to be a project of the Arboretum. It's something you have to nurture. So that's kind of the last one. And then I also wanted to point out, I don't know if anybody who's on the call reads the Nina Simon Museum 2.0 blog. It's definitely one that I would recommend, but she actually just last week had a post about building more inclusive nonprofits that I thought was very, very applicable. The quote that I loved is that the path to the desired outcome is dark and riddled with 400-page toolkits. And I could really feel that, because I feel like we have the motivation, people understand they need to change, they have the vision of where they want to be at the end of the road, but figuring out the steps for how to get there is really one of the most challenging parts. So for us, working with an outside consultant has really helped guide us down that path. And that's one of the things that has been super, super helpful. Of course, not all organizations are going to have the budget to be able to do that, but having somebody who knows what they're talking about lead the way has really been indispensable. So with all that said, I think that's pretty much the end of my presentation, but I'm more than happy to take some questions and talk about some of the things we've done. Katie, I don't know if you've got any questions for me from the group.
Hi, Anna. Yes, we do have some questions. First of all, thank you for such an informative session. This is Katie from Longwood Gardens. As Abby mentioned earlier, I'm the webinar committee co-chair along with Abby, so I'll be sending some questions along to Anna now. The first one that came in is from Aubrey. It's kind of a two-part question for you, Anna. The first part is, how do you determine what materials you translate? And Aubrey's follow-up question is, what are some ways you will try to gather data from non-members?
Great question. Sorry, I'm just writing some notes so I don't forget. As far as making the decision for what materials to translate, I am not in our marketing department, and the original co-chair of our council was in the marketing department, so he really led the way on that one. It's kind of opportunistic. We stick with the big promotional themes for the year. So the one I showed earlier was from Arbor Day, which is our big spring promotional push. I believe we've done some for illumination, our winter lights show, and potentially for our fall color season. Our busiest season is the month of October, when all of the trees are changing color. So for the most part, we've kept it to those bigger times. And then, of course, the map and guide was the crucial piece for on-site visitors. We don't really have any other handouts or anything, but it's something that we're looking to integrate as we have more exhibits come. If we're going to do a program, we want it to be at least bilingual. And then non-member data, we've played around with a lot of different concepts for how to gather non-member data, some of them more realistic than others. We've talked about, do we just have people interview like every 10th person who comes in and have them fill out a card that has some really basic demographic questions on it? Do we want to pick like 3 weekends a month and have people on site, but then we're skewing based on time of day and day of the week that people are visiting. We've definitely not cracked that yet. We've also talked about working with an evaluation firm and let them deal with the methodology question, and just pay them to come and do the surveys for us. So we've played around with a lot. We haven't really settled on any one thing, but it's definitely something that we are trying to wrap our heads around and potentially ask for funding for in future years. But I don't have a good answer. I'm sorry.
We do have another question coming in now from Jessica. Her question is, do you have advice on how to get that leadership buy-in and communicate the value of putting significant staff, time, and money into these efforts?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Like I said, I'm very, very lucky that our leadership was on board from the beginning. I think this is really, really hard work to do if you don't have that support. That being said, there's a ton of research out there in the world just kind of showing the value of building diversity within your workforce, of reaching more communities. That market research has been done. I will say I think the museum community is a little bit ahead of the garden world on this. So if your garden is also a member of the American Alliance of Museums, they have done a lot of work on D&I and have a lot accessible on their website. That's a great place to start, and there's some good folks that you can reach out to who've been doing this work in a nonprofit setting that's very similar to gardens, but not exactly gardens. Another resource for getting started is other cultural organizations in your area. We actually had a woman come who I believe was director of HR and also director of D&I at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And she came and spoke to our council at one of our meetings and kind of talked about their progress. So if you can show that other organizations in your city are already making strides with this work, it can be a little bit of peer pressure to keep up with them. So there's a few different ways you can approach it. I think it depends on who you're trying to convince. There's the data argument of you want to reach more audiences, you want to have a more competitive staff to do better work. And then there's also kind of the heart-tugging motivation of you just want to be a more inclusive environment and you want to do good in the world. So it really depends on how you're trying to convince people. But you can go either way. I really would recommend reaching out to other organizations in your area to see how they did it, not just museums, but also there's a lot of work in the theater world that is being done on diversity and inclusion. So if you have an active theater scene in your city, that might be a good place to go. If your city has an office, like a mayor's office of cultural affairs, which the city of Chicago does, they might have some resources as well as data on, how diverse the community is, and then you can compare that to yours and your internal data and see how you compare, and then show that to your leadership and say, look, we don't stack up, we aren't representing our community. And theoretically, in everybody's mission, there's some sort of statement about serving. We have these gardens to help our community, to help our environment, to help people, and we want to help all people. So, I'm a softie, so at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to for me. But I know different types of people work better with different arguments.
Okay, great. And we do have another question for you, Anna. This one is, what steps are you taking to get more diverse members as opposed to diverse one-time visitors?
Oh, that's another great question. I wish I had my membership director on the line so she could speak to it more specifically. Right now, I don't think we're doing too much direct outreach to our non-member visitors, specifically targeting diverse non-members. This past year, the image that's still on the screen is from our exhibit this past year, which is in our main parking lot. And the trolls have really changed our attendance patterns. Our non-member attendance spiked something like 15% over the course of the year. So just by the nature of bringing in so many more non-member visitors, our conversion rate to membership, we converted a lot more, and right now our membership is just starting to reflect that non-member visitor a little bit more. But as far as specific initiatives, there really haven't been many, at least that I've been aware of. Aside from the on-site conversions that we do with everybody, all mailings and emails and all that kind of stuff, I don't think there's been anything to really target our diverse non-member visitors to become members.
Okay, and another question for you, Anna. How would creating such a council be a different process for a smaller organization?
I think that a smaller organization might be a lot easier in some ways, to be perfectly frank. The Arboretum is a big place. We have a lot of bureaucracy. We have to get a lot of approvals for things. There are days I wish, like, gosh, if I only had like 20 other staff, I could just have everybody in one room and we could talk through all of this stuff together. So I think with a smaller organization, your process probably wouldn't have to be nearly as formal. Ours was very regimented because we wanted to make sure that we were covering all of our bases, including all of our departments. Everybody had a chance to contribute. A lot of those focus groups I talked about earlier in the presentation were strategically created so that we had, again, equal representations from different departments. But if you're coming from a smaller organization, you probably also have a better idea of what specific issues you need to be dealing with, and you don't have to spend quite as much time laying that foundational groundwork. I think a lot of it was still useful and good exercises to go through, but if you're working with 20, 30, 40 people, well, for one, everybody's going to be in each other's business a lot more, so you'll have more understanding between departments, I would think, and also everybody would have a better understanding of where those key priorities should be. Like for us, choosing those three, the workplace, workforce, and community focus areas, was a pretty long, involved process. But if it's a smaller organization, you can make decisions faster and start moving on some of this stuff a lot faster. So I think that would be a great benefit. It wouldn't take 3 years to just kind of get off the ground. You'd be able to move a lot faster, and you might be able to make do without a consultant. I still think having that outside perspective was incredibly useful, especially because we don't have a designated D&I person on staff. So I would probably recommend still working with an outside person, but a lot of that timeline could be sped up, I would imagine.
Great, and we have what looks like one final question coming in, and that is, what is the biggest lesson learned since the launch of your council?
Ooh, biggest lesson learned. Slow and steady is probably the moral of the story for us so far. There have definitely been some staff who were on the council initially who were ready to, we had some revolutionaries who were ready to just burn it all to the ground and start over. So tempering people's expectations and setting the course, setting expectations so that people understood this is a long-term thing. And of course, we use tree metaphors a lot here. So you plant a seed for a tree and you're not going to see the results for 20 years. And that's kind of the framing that we had to get into people's heads, is we're making all these small accomplishments and we're doing little projects here and there, which are all good, but they're all contributing to this larger goal of creating an inclusive organization. And that's just not something that's going to happen overnight. It's something that's going to be painful at times, and it's going to be hard, and we're probably going to have missteps along the way, but we're in it for the long haul. And having a really solid framework for the council, and again, working with an outside partner, helps it stay sustainable. So nobody's getting burnt out doing this work. Everybody's contributing. Everybody's feeling a little bit of success, but we're able to keep it going for years into the future. Because like I said before, this is not work that's going to be quick or easy. It's definitely something you have to be committed to for the long haul.
Great. Thank you again, Anna, for sharing your expertise with us. We really enjoyed your session.